What's going on, everybody? This is going to be a follow-up video to the interview I did with Dr. Jaquish. If you guys haven't seen it, I'll link it down below. In that video, I tried to ask as many of the hard or relatively tough questions that I certainly had, I know many of you guys had as well, in that video as possible. Wanted to try and push back as much as I could while still respecting him and letting him some room to kind of talk and clarify some of his statements. But there was a lot of stuff in that video that I was left still having some questions, and I'm sure many of you guys had as well. And in this video, I was more so going to focus on specifically the research on variable resistance that John cites and kind of offer some feedback to that. But I thought that would be way too much of a in-depth and exhaustive video to really go through the research. We will go through some of it a little bit here, but that would be a much longer video. If you guys want me to do that, I will do that at a later date. So what I want to do in this video is try and kill two birds with one stone. I want to talk about some general problems and issues I have with the X3 bar system itself, and also some of the claims that are put forth by Dr. Jaquish and the X3 system. Because this was something I promised you guys in the past, because I certainly do like the product itself. I've said that many times. I like the way it just functionally works. I like the way it looks. Given at this point in time, I do give him some credit for just developing this type of system that has basically spawned many copycat type systems, despite how relatively simplistic this thing is. And while I'm going to be critical, to be clear up front, so you guys might seem like I'm kind of being confusing, kind of going back and forth. Really, like I said at the start of that interview with him, I don't really care too much about the claims. I just really like the product itself. I think for the price point that it's at, I made a whole video comparing what you're getting with pricing it out with other higher quality materials. You're kind of getting somewhat on equal footing a little bit, especially now. Shameless plug, there is a huge sale going on right now. If you guys do want to pick it up, you guys can check my link down below in the description box. It really helps support me and the channel. But if you're kind of considering it, like maybe you want a little apprehensive about the research and the claims, just want us to get the product even right for you, then you guys are going to like this video, because more or less that's what I kind of get into is potential issues and maybe some reasons why you might not want to consider picking one up. So the first thing I do not like about the X3 bar system, and this kind of goes back to Dr. Jaquish's claims, is that the X3 bar system is so vastly superior, or variable resistance is so vastly superior compared to weightlifting or any other traditional means of weightlifting. And this is obviously put forth in his book, Weightlifting is a Waste of Time, which is a very entertaining read. He presents a good thesis for his argument, but I would say if you kind of dive a little deeper, which we'll get into, I don't think the claim is really there in my opinion, and certainly it's in the program design of the X3 bar system as well. So like I said at the onset, I'm not trying to make an exhaustive review or a thorough analysis of the pros and cons of resistance band training, because even the term resistance band training or variable resistance has so many different applications and contexts you can have to consider. Even Dr. J actually said the same thing himself. Are we talking about certain demographics? What type of variable resistance? What type of bands are you using? What kind of ability the person has, etc. So there's all sorts of nuances and applications, but the very first thing we have to do, really in any argument here, is to establish some sort of context. And the context or rationale of using these types of systems, or his system specifically, is that it is superior for building lean body tissue or muscle hypertrophy alongside strength and power, you could say, as like a secondary benefit. So I would simply say and invite you guys, if you guys are critical like I was, and I wanted to get into this more in the interview, I just didn't have a whole lot of time to. Again, I wanted to kind of express himself, and I kind of knew I was gonna make a follow-up video to this, is just check up his book. Chapter 2 of his book actually gets into the variable resistance research. If you were to read through that section, I understand a lot of you guys aren't going to pick up his book for a number of reasons, but I'll actually link a part on his website that actually outlines specifically the research behind this. Really covers everything that was in this chapter. If you actually kind of follow the flow chart of the research, and I'll put a lot of it down below, some of the stuff is not open access, meaning not everybody can access it unless you have memberships to that particular journal or research article. I do, with my membership and my profession as a professor and having access to these journals, I can get access and have looked at these things. I would say it's not that convincing in my opinion. Also, to John's credit, and this is just something we kind of know at this point, there's not a whole lot of research on variable resistance. You also have to consider, like I said, the context and application, and then we kind of sifting through this research to seeing, which ones are really talking about with the application of building lean body tissue and using a specific methodology and different types of bands as well. But I would say once you do go through that, I don't think it's really an open and shut case for variable resistance being superior to weightlifting. I will put down below in the description box some of the research I was actually gonna get into a little bit more in depth. Again, that's gonna be a much longer video from John, and also some variable resistance research as well. But I would argue much of the research that is in this book is more so aligned with strength and power gains than it is with muscle building or muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth. And that's the primary audience, I'd say primary way this product is marketed to the masses. So I think that's kind of an issue I have also with the research. John does cite some somewhat convincing arguments that do show that variable resistance for sure has a benefit in resistance training, as definitely a valuable tool and produces great results. He makes a good point of actually being mindful, looking at the type of studies that actually showed that, say, resistance bands were inferior to resistance training. We're using things like TheraBands, which are very cheap. I shouldn't say cheap, but like more thinner quality material that's more used for rehabilitation. That showed it didn't work. However, I've actually found research studies using variable resistance in the form of TheraBands actually surpassing weightlifting. So that would kind of, again, you can always find something to the opposite effect somewhere. He didn't use that particular research. My point is there are actual claims of TheraBands actually outperforming traditional weightlifting bands as well. And there's actually a research study that John referenced when his support for not elite level athletes, but like those that were not physically active, showing the benefits of variable resistance. And in one of those studies, was looking at a demographic of women. You can look at the pictures. It definitely looks like they're using, it doesn't say TheraBands, but it looks like the kind of thinner quality bands and kind of supporting variable resistance over traditional weightlifting means. So even though he says in one end of the spectrum, they're kind of, you don't look at those studies, he also was kind of saw them support those in one of the references he was showing. Now, interestingly enough, I did find a recent article from July 2023 looking at the effects of variable resistance training versus conventional resistance training on muscle hypertrophy, a systematic review. And if you actually go through this, this is an open access journal. I will link it down below so you guys can check it out. The conclusion was that it revealed that variable resistance training does not produce greater gain in muscle mass compared to conventional training over a short, medium period of time with untrained subjects. Therefore, it is necessary to compare these two training methods over longer periods of time and with subjects with more experience in resistance training. Now, with that being said, I'm certainly not saying that muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth is not possible training with variable resistance. I'm just saying the totality of evidence doesn't support that it's ultimately vastly superior, especially compared to all the decades of research and also anecdotal, just visual stuff we kind of see in the weight room that traditional weightlifting does not work. Now, if you go on the X3 website and even the book, you will see a lot of impressive before and after pictures, which are good, but we've certainly seen that marketed in pretty much any resistance training type program that's been out there throughout the years. The other thing I don't like about the X3 system is that there are inherent limitations to just this setup. As great and as portable, and again, much as I do like this system, as with everything, there's gonna be limitations, and that goes with variable resistance training as well. Right after I posted the interview with John, I had somebody reach out to me via email who was in their 70s, who said they picked up the X3, was excited to use it, but now they have to return it because most of the exercises demonstrated, or at least a few key ones, like the overhead press and the front squat, they said they simply could not do, even with the lightest white band, which I'm not too surprised with, and it kind of makes sense. You're not gonna do exactly every single movement that's possible, but my point is the machine, or this device itself, has some inherent limitations. It is a narrow board. It's not gonna fit every single person. The bar, which we'll get to, isn't gonna fit every single person, but just variable resistance as a basic tool might not be for everybody. So that particular person, I gave them some other options that they can consider, possibly even just using the machine for certain exercises that work for them. But yeah, I mean, that person probably can get results using a dumbbell, some adjustable bends, of course, the total gym like I'm talking about, or maybe even like a multi-station resistance training machine. As much as people knock those things, I've heard of many success stories of people using and getting great results from just those single unit machines. But my specific issue with the limitations is just the exercises themselves. They work and feel great on some of the key movements, but things like bent over rows, I mean, you're kind of limited if this is gonna be your only system as the only way to like set up for any kind of horizontal row position. And even in the interview, I did push back with John and say if there's any other system that was set up, or could you rig something that's a little bit different using variable resistance? And he did say, yeah, you could rig something else. So just looking at my minuscule kind of minimalistic setup that's somewhat minimalistic, I could rig bands in a number of different sections. So I said one of the great things about this system is you can get a lot done with a little short amount of space and do a whole lot of key things with this small thing. But certainly, yeah, you're missing out on horizontal or vertical pulling exercises for your back. You're limited for some exercises in your chest. So while it's great, I definitely think it might limit some people in some other potential options if they're looking at this as like a standalone system. What I also believe is a limiting factor of the X3 that I wish they did is really allowing the bigger bar to be purchased up front. John did ask the question why he doesn't sell just the individual bar. According to him, he wants you to use it properly as a system as a whole. Again, I can kind of understand and appreciate that, but I think the argument is still out there for maybe for bigger people and bigger shoulders, that this small foot plate might not cut it for people with bigger feet and just kind of a bigger base, bigger hips. I like it personally with the dimensions. I like the way the line of pull goes with the bands. but I can definitely appreciate, I like this long bar. Honestly, I did a whole review for us, check it out, that this might be beneficial for some people. Now, John didn't really say this. He has a scientific rationale or biomechanical rationale of why he likes these dimensions that I did push back a little bit, even with the chest press, which I'll get to in a second. I think this was more so built this way personally. Again, I'm not saying this, giving John every benefit of the doubt, just for packaging, shipping purposes, that this just kind of makes sense. You also got to keep in mind that the longer the bar, just to say using like a standard barbell, resistance bands aren't going to work unless you're getting like a pair of bands. So for a system standpoint, you can't go super wide unless you're getting a longer band. It's just going to pre-stretch the band. And the same goes for the foot plate. If the foot plate is really wide, you're gonna need a bigger band, or it's just gonna, again, prematurely stretch the resistance bands. Which gets into just the press. Now, I grew to really like this. I was gonna get into this a little bit more. I understand, already knew kind of John's reaction, but I kind of left it at, I was gonna kind of push a little bit more. I said this before when I first got this. To me, the rationale for getting this, no question, it just feels better doing a chest press with the bigger bar. While I do like this chest press, I like the way it feels, I do disagree with him respectfully on this grip position for the bars. Great person I did learn from down Wichita Falls, went down and learned from him personally, is Mark Grippetel. Great explanation on barbell training from a biomechanical standpoint. Pick up his book, Starting Strength, if you've never heard from it. Odds are you have, but he has a great video talking about the rationale and all his resources about ideal setup from a biomechanical standpoint for things such as overhead pressing and also horizontal pressing like a bench press. The next negative thing, if I were to look into it more, and this is based on what you guys have told me, is kind of the band quality. Now, these are very heavy bands. This is the original stock bands that came with the system. This is the upgraded Paraforce bands, which are USA made ones. These are definitely objectively better. They're more expensive. You got to upgrade for them. I do really like these a lot, honestly, compared to all the bands I have. These seem to do something where they like to kind of fray a little bit more. And that is, according to them, just normal wear and tear. Now that can happen to bands. It doesn't seem like it likes to happen to these more so than that. These are layered bands, and I have priced out, I said if you got comparable bands like Rogue Fitness, you're gonna pay upwards of 120, 140 for some set of bands like this. These are my original bands. They're being fine right now, but I know for some people that might just be something, the frayed quality about that. I don't know. Maybe there's something to that, but for right now, my band's doing okay, but that seems to be an issue people are having. But on that note, what I don't like is, especially if you're so into this system of variable resistance have all these scientific rationales of the applications of what you're doing, I think they should make different band lengths for certain people, especially with this system. So everything comes in the 41-inch band. A lot of people have written in, especially if you're someone who's shorter or taller, you want different band lengths and band tensions for different reasons. So right now they only sell the 41 inches. So a company like Serious Steel, also a shameless plug, you can save, I think, 10% using code SBT if you want to take advantage of that. Serious Steel actually made some new band lengths for this exact purpose for these setups. So they have 37-inch bands, which are a little bit smaller, work great for chest presses, deadlifts for kind of shorter individuals, and they even make 32-inch bands. I know a lot of you guys are taking advantage of as well. So I wish they did something like that, especially if it's so heavily invested into the variable resistance science. They offered those options for certain people. And then finally, what I don't like, or I'll push back a little bit, it's kind of a love-hate. I do like the dimensions of the force plate. The only thing I would say is that for some people, for me it's fine, but for some people, your feet are gonna be too big for this foot plate and for these dimensions, and I could see some people wanting a little bit bigger foot plate. The only thing is maybe some wear and tear over time. You can see this likes to kind of divot in a little bit, but I will say, this might be based on their trial and error and design, I think you do want something lower to the ground because anything kind of higher, the thing will want to move a little bit more. Even when I do things like with their single leg squat, I really got to make sure I have nice solid tension even on this really low platform because it can like to flop up and hit you in the face. Now those are just my general points, and you saw how long it took me to get through that. So in a future video, if you guys want me to go through the variable resistance science, I certainly can, I'm willing to. It's just something that's going to be a lot more in the weeds, especially looking at the methods, the statistical analysis and how things were kind of done, the population. But I'll just go out and say there's really not a whole lot out there, especially in the specific context we're talking about. And that's why I don't think you see many exhaustive reviews about this subject. I think at this point we know variable resistance can be a good, viable resistance training tool, has a lot of great positive applications, but there are, of course, cons and implications or context applications that are not going to work that well for everyone across the board, in which case you might want to go to some other traditional method. So I'm all about the thing on this channel. You guys know that everything essentially works to a certain degree within a given context or goal. It's really about the consistency and also the effort you place upon it. Of course, programming is important. I treat this thing like nothing more than another tool in the toolbox of things I like. I love specific exercises on this. There are some days I travel, this is all I'm using, but of course, if I got other stuff at my disposal that does a better job or a better tool, or just a different stimuli for that particular day, I'm gonna take advantage of it. So with that being said, again, I think it's a good product. You guys can take advantage of it with the discount code down below if you guys wanna support me in the channel. Otherwise, it's just something else. Hopefully you got something across this video about variable resistance. I will see you on the next video. Thank you.